The sun dipped low over the Pacific Ocean, casting golden streaks across the waves that lapped gently against the private beach of the Mira Vista Grand Resort in Malibu. Everything looked like it belonged on the front of a luxury travel magazine. Palm trees swaying lazily, guests sipping chilled cocktails by the infinity pool, laughter rising from candlelit dinner tables arranged beneath elegant cabanas. To anyone watching, it was paradise. For Amara Hayes, it was more than that. It was survival. Wearing a crisp white server's blouse and her name tag neatly pinned, Amara moved from table to table, her posture upright, her smile steady. To the guests, she was invisible until they needed something. But Amara noticed everything. The slight tension in a couple's eyes before they ordered wine. The way a businessman checked his phone after every bite. The barely audible sighs from overworked staff behind the bar. She was 23, working 3 jobs, and this one, at the most expensive resort on the coast, was her anchor. It paid better than the others. She used every shift to edge closer to her goal, tuition for law school. Amara didn't dream small. She wanted to study civil rights law, become a voice for the silenced. Her mother had always told her, "The world will try to make you feel small, but you were born to take up space." And so, every shift, she wore that truth like armor. But armor could only do so much. It happened on a night like any other. Quiet jazz in the background, couples toasting anniversaries, servers gliding through the open-air dining hall. Amara approached table 19 with poise, holding a tray of custom cocktails that the guests had ordered 15 minutes earlier. She hadn't yet spoken to the woman at the center of the table, but she had noticed her from the start. Everyone had. Tall, platinum blonde, dressed in a floor-length gown that shimmered like ice, Bianca Wexler sat with her chin tilted just so. A hedge fund heiress, influencer, and the kind of woman whose name opened every door. Bianca wasn't here to blend in. Her laugh had the sharpness of glass breaking, and when she spoke, others listened. Or at least, pretended to. Amara approached carefully. "Your drinks, ladies," she said gently. Bianca didn't look up. Her fingers tapped against the table. The moment Amara set down the crystal glass in front of her, the sound stopped. "You've smudged it," Bianca said, her voice as flat as a blade. Amara blinked. "Pardon me?" Bianca finally looked up, her blue eyes cold and calculating. "This glass. Your fingerprints are on it. Are you new or just careless?" "I can bring you a new one," Amara offered quickly, reaching for the glass. But Bianca pulled it away. "Number. You've already touched it. The moment's ruined." The table grew quiet. Bianca's friends exchanged glances. One of them chuckled awkwardly, unsure whether this was a performance or an actual tantrum. Amara stood still, her hands at her sides. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I meant no offense." "Of course you didn't," Bianca replied with a sharp smile. "But that's the thing about people like you, isn't it? Always in the way. Always apologizing." A beat passed. The air shifted. Her words weren't just about a glass anymore. Amara's throat tightened, but she kept her composure. "Would you prefer someone else to serve your table?" Bianca tilted her head. "What I prefer is to enjoy my night without being reminded of mediocrity." That was when the laughter stopped. That was when the table noticed the tremble in Amara's jaw, the way her hand curled ever so slightly behind her back to keep from shaking. Then it happened. Bianca stood up. "You stepped on my dress," she snapped, loud enough for the entire dining hall to hear. Amara froze. She had moved with practiced grace all evening. There was no way. I said, Bianca repeated, her voice rising, you stepped on my dress. A hush fell over the restaurant. Servers stopped mid-step. Guests looked up. One child dropped his spoon. I didn't, Amara said, her voice low but firm. You did, Bianca spat. And now it's ruined. This dress could buy your education, your apartment, and your grandmother's house, if she has one. Amara's breath caught. Please, ma'am. But Bianca wasn't finished. Her expression twisted with fury. And then, without warning, her hand snapped through the air. The sound of the slap was deafening. It echoed through the hall like thunder. Amara staggered back a step, her cheek already swelling, her eyes wide with disbelief. A collective gasp rose around them. Bianca stood tall, chest heaving, lips curled, and then silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the jazz had stopped. Amara didn't cry. She didn't shout. But something inside her shifted. A decision was made in that exact moment. Not out of rage, but from something deeper. She lifted her hand, and with deliberate calm, she struck Bianca across the face. Gasps turned to stunned silence. Someone dropped their glass. Bianca stumbled back, her hand flying to her cheek, her eyes wild. You don't get to humiliate me, Amara said, her voice steady. Not me. Not anyone. The room was frozen. Then a voice spoke, soft but clear, from a nearby table. She deserved that. Another voice followed. It's about time someone stood up. And like a tide breaking through, murmurs turned to applause. Not loud, not chaotic, but real. The kind that said, we saw it. We're not pretending we didn't. Bianca stood there, trembling, not in power, but in disbelief. Because in all her life of wealth and entitlement, she had never been challenged. Not like this. Not publicly. Not by someone she thought beneath her. But Amara Hayes was not beneath anyone. And this story, well, it was just getting started. The slap still echoed in Amara's ears long after the dining room fell silent. It wasn't the sound itself that haunted her. It was what it symbolized. For years, she had trained herself to stay composed, to blend into the background, to serve without reaction. But in that one electric second, her silence, once a shield, became a prison, and she had broken free from it. She could still feel the sting on her own palm. Not from violence, but from the weight of centuries, of everything black women like her had endured in places just like this. The humiliation, the invisibility, the whispered comments and dismissive glances, all disguised as formality, all accepted as normal. And now she had broken that silence, in public, in front of people who had never imagined someone like her standing up to someone like Bianca Wexler. Management arrived minutes later, not because they cared, but because the internet had already beaten them there. A video of the incident, shaky and low quality, had hit social media. Someone had recorded the entire exchange, from Bianca's outburst to Amara's defiant slap. In less than 10 minutes, it had been reshared by dozens of accounts, and by the time the floor manager reached table 19, the video had a title, When a Rich Guest Goes Too Far and Finally Gets Put in Her Place. Amara stood behind the bar now, her hands trembling slightly. She hadn't been told what would happen next. No one had spoken to her beyond a terse, "Wait here." She looked down at her shoes, her uniform, the calluses on her palms from years of work, and she braced for the inevitable. A woman in a black suit finally approached her. Melissa Tran, the resort's public relations manager. Her eyes were unreadable, her tablet clutched tightly against her chest. "Amara, we need to talk," she said. Amara followed her into the manager's office, a sleek, glass-walled room that felt more like a modern bank than a restaurant backroom. Melissa closed the door behind them, then sat down without offering Amara a chair. "Bianca Wexler is demanding an apology," she said flatly. Amara blinked. "She hit me. She's also threatening a lawsuit. She's claiming you assaulted her. The video doesn't show everything." "I stood up for myself," Amara replied, her voice firmer now. "I know what happened," Melissa said. "But this resort, this brand, we cater to a specific clientele. Do you understand what that means?" Amara didn't answer. Melissa continued, her tone sharpening. "We're asking you to write a statement. You'll say you regret how you handled the situation, that emotions got the better of you, that you overreacted. You won't admit fault, but you will apologize." It felt like a slow burn moving through Amara's chest. "You want me to apologize for defending myself?" Melissa sighed, her voice softening in a way that felt manufactured. "Amara, look, I know this isn't fair, but this is how it works. People like Bianca donate to the foundations that own properties like this. They sit on boards. They influence reviews, ratings. If you want to keep your job—" "I don't," Amara interrupted, her voice calm and cold. "Not anymore." Melissa stared at her. Amara stood. "You don't pay me enough to carry someone else's shame." And with that, she walked out. The hallway was still buzzing. Guests whispering. Phones filming. Co-workers frozen mid-motion, watching her pass. She walked past the staff locker room without stopping, straight through the back exit of the restaurant into the night. The salt in the air hit her lungs like freedom. Outside, the wind off the ocean cut through the tension that had settled on her shoulders. She sat on a bench overlooking the cliffs. Her phone buzzed with notifications, but she ignored them. She didn't want to see who had turned her into a trending topic. She didn't want to read the comments, supportive or cruel. For once, she just wanted silence, the kind that didn't ask her to disappear. But the world didn't stay quiet. By morning, the video had over 1 million views. News outlets had picked it up. Black Waitress stands up to entitled guest. Luxury resort slammed for handling of viral incident. Some called her brave. Others called her unprofessional. But Amara didn't care about public opinion. What mattered were the messages, dozens of them, from people who had been in her shoes. From a young busser in Miami who said, "You reminded me I'm not invisible." From a hotel maid in Chicago, "They treat us like furniture until we push back. Thank you for pushing." Even from older women who said they'd been through worse, and only now, decades later, could they finally say, "I wish I had done what you did." Amara had been fired within 12 hours of the incident. No hearing, no official investigation, just an email stating she had violated guest respect protocols. Her paycheck was mailed out. Her employee ID revoked. She felt both lighter and heavier than ever before. Lighter, because she had no more masks to wear. Heavier, because she knew the cost of speaking up was still far too high. That afternoon, as she sat at a community coffee shop downtown, trying to process the whirlwind of the last 24 hours, a man approached her. He was quiet, wearing a navy blazer and glasses. Not flashy, just direct. "Amara Hayes?" he asked. She nodded cautiously. "My name is Jamal Rivers. I'm an attorney with a civil rights group called the Horizon Collective. We've been following your story." She didn't say anything. We'd like to represent you. Pro bono. You've got a case. Against the resort. Against Wexler. You don't have to fight this alone. Amara stared at him, unsure if she could trust what he was offering. But there was something in his voice, like he'd sat across from too many women like her, seen too many silences paid for in bruises and shame. You think people will believe me? She asked. He smiled gently. They already do. And for the first time since that night, Amara felt the silence around her shift, not into noise, but into something else. Power. She had lost her job, but she had found her voice. And the world, it had just begun to listen. The following days unfolded like a storm breaking over calm waters. Amara Hayes, once invisible behind trays of cocktails and plates of overpriced appetizers, now found her name circulating through news cycles, social feeds, and living room conversations across the country. What was meant to be a routine shift had erupted into a national reckoning, one that asked a dangerous, overdue question: who really holds the power? At first, it seemed like the answer was clear. Bianca Wexler's legal team moved quickly, releasing a statement that painted her as the real victim. According to them, she had been provoked by a combative staff member, and the slap, yes, she admitted to it, was a moment of emotional self-defense. The press release was laced with coded language: unprofessional, aggressive, unstable. Words that clung to black women like a second skin. It might have worked. It had worked before. But this time, the world had video. And not just any video. Multiple angles. Multiple witnesses. A crowd of resort guests had caught the moment from different perspectives, capturing not only Bianca's violent outburst, but the hours of antagonism that led to it. One camera caught Bianca throwing her wine glass at the floor after Amara walked away. Another caught the moment security pulled Amara aside, not to protect her, but to question her. The footage was raw, unedited, and undeniable. The internet didn't just react, it erupted. Hashtags emerged overnight. Stand with Amara, tip your waitress, power served cold. Celebrities shared the video. Activists posted essays. Former resort employees from across the country began sharing eerily similar stories under anonymous accounts. This isn't new, one wrote. It's just finally being filmed. And through it all, Amara stayed silent. Not because she was afraid, but because, for once, she didn't have to speak to be heard. Behind the scenes, the Horizon Collective had moved fast. Jamal Rivers, her attorney, wasn't just a legal mind. He was a strategist. With his team of civil rights lawyers and media consultants, they laid the groundwork for a lawsuit that wasn't just about money. It was about precedent. Your case, he told Amara, isn't just yours. It belongs to every service worker who's ever swallowed a disrespectful comment to keep a paycheck. Every woman who smiled through harassment. Every black girl who's been told she was too loud, too angry, too much. They didn't just file against the resort for wrongful termination. They filed against Bianca Wexler personally for assault and defamation. Bianca scoffed in the press. This is what happens when you give a little attention to people who've done nothing with their lives. But the public wasn't on her side anymore. Luxury brands she endorsed quietly cut ties. A beauty campaign pulled her face from a billboard in Times Square. Talk shows she once strutted onto with champagne, and sound bites stopped returning her agent's calls. She still had money, still had connections. But what she had lost was harder to buy back: credibility. Meanwhile, Amara was invited onto Good Morning America, The View, and dozens of podcasts, but she declined most of them. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. Not yet. She was still healing, still trying to understand what it meant to be seen for the first time on someone else's terms. She accepted just one invitation from a small local show in her hometown of Oakland. The host, a black woman named Renee, who had once been a waitress herself, offered no gimmicks, no gotcha questions, just space. When asked why she slapped Bianca back, Amara didn't speak in outrage. She spoke in clarity. "I didn't do it to make a point," she said. "I did it because, in that moment, I remembered I'm a human being, not a servant, not a shadow, just a person." And she forgot that. That clip was shared more than the slap itself, because it said everything. Power, it turns out, wasn't just about money, or fame, or lawyers. True power was being able to look someone in the eye and say, "You don't get to define me." Power was choosing dignity over comfort, integrity over silence. And Amara was no longer silent. The resort, facing mounting pressure, tried to release a neutral statement of regret. It wasn't enough. A boycott campaign surged. Hundreds of travelers canceled bookings. Influencers once paid to post from their cabanas began posting exposés instead. Under pressure, the board placed the resort manager on leave. A diversity and ethics audit was ordered. But for Amara, none of it was enough. She wanted something lasting. "I don't want a settlement check and a press apology," she told Jamal. "I want policies. I want change." So Jamal drafted new demands: mandatory anti-discrimination training for all resort staff and leadership, transparent reporting channels for employee abuse, a public fund backed by the resort's investors to support legal aid for service workers facing harassment or retaliation. The resort stalled at first, then the board folded. The agreement made headlines. And quietly, behind the noise, Amara smiled, not for the attention, but for the message it sent. You can't humiliate someone into silence anymore, not without consequences. That week, Amara took a walk down the same boardwalk where she used to bus tables at a cheap cafe during high school. Everything looked smaller now, or maybe she had just grown. She stopped outside the window of a bookstore and stared at her own reflection. The woman who looked back at her wasn't broken. She wasn't bitter. She was becoming. Not because she fought back, but because when she finally did, the world couldn't look away. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a force. And power. It had a new face now. The courtroom was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that held breath, expectation, and consequence all at once, like the air right before lightning splits the sky. Amara Hayes sat at the plaintiff's table in a black suit that hugged her shoulders like armor. Her chin lifted, but her fingers interlaced tightly in her lap. Across from her, Bianca Wexler wore a crisp cream blazer and an expression that wavered between annoyance and disbelief. For the first time in her life, Bianca wasn't the one being served. She was being seen, examined, judged, and it terrified her. Amara wasn't seeking revenge. She didn't need to. What she wanted, what she demanded, was recognition. That her pain wasn't invisible. That her dignity wasn't disposable. That her story, like so many others, deserved the full weight of the law and the full light of day. The judge called the room to order, and the first witness was called. Jamal Rivers, Amara's attorney, began not with the viral video, but with the beginning. He laid out Amara's employment record. Stellar, unblemished, full of praise from supervisors and customers alike. He presented the text messages from the restaurant manager who had fired her without warning, who had written, "We can't afford this kind of heat. You understand, right?" The courtroom heard those words like a confession. Then came the video. The footage played on a large monitor. Bianca Wexler, standing, screaming, then slapping Amara so hard the room recoiled. And then, Amara's hand, steady, unapologetic, delivering the slap heard around the internet. But Jamal didn't let it rest there. He brought in the deeper cut, the context. One by one, guests from the resort took the stand. A couple from Ohio who said they'd seen Bianca taunt Amara during dinner. A server who admitted she'd once been told, "If a guest is rich enough, let them talk to you however they want." A young hostess who cried on the stand when she confessed, "I didn't speak up because I was afraid, and I'm ashamed of that." The jury listened, and slowly, so did the judge. Then Jamal called Amara. She walked to the witness stand without hesitation. Her heels didn't falter. Her voice didn't crack. But her eyes, deep, dark, and fierce, held the weight of every woman who had ever had to swallow her rage to keep a job, keep the peace, keep her pride from bleeding too publicly. "Ms. Hayes," Jamal began, "do you remember the moment before it happened?" "Yes," Amara said. "I remember every second." "And why didn't you walk away?" Amara looked out at the courtroom, not to the judge or the lawyers, but to the faces in the gallery. Strangers, reporters, a young black girl in the back row, no more than 16, eyes wide, leaning forward. "Because I've spent my whole life walking away," Amara said. "And this time, I wanted to stand still. I wanted to remind her, and myself, that I'm not here to be broken quietly." There was no sound in the courtroom. Just breathe. Just hearts. Bianca's team tried to discredit her. They brought up a single time Amara had raised her voice at a coworker after being called aggressive during training. They leaned into the stereotype. They pressed her with questions meant to provoke her into anger, to justify what Bianca had done. But Amara didn't take the bait. She didn't need to. Her story had already been told, and the truth was too loud to bury. Bianca finally took the stand, and for the first time, the courtroom saw what money couldn't protect her from: the truth. She tried to paint herself as stressed, overwhelmed, provoked. "I felt threatened," she said. "Threatened by what?" Jamal asked, tilting his head. "A woman doing her job?" Bianca faltered. "She looked at me like I didn't matter." "Is that what you're used to, Ms. Wexler? Being the only one allowed to matter?" The objection came too late. The silence after said more than the transcript ever would. When closing statements arrived, Jamal didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform. He simply pointed to Amara and said, "She didn't fight for fame. She didn't ask for a camera. She asked for respect. And that shouldn't be revolutionary." Then he paused. "But it is. And that's why we're here." The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its breath. "We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Amara Hayes." A gasp. A single cry from the gallery. Then applause. Immediate. Irrepressible. The damages were awarded. Monetary, yes. But that wasn't what mattered most. It was the wording in the verdict: intentional emotional harm and public defamation. It was an acknowledgement that what happened to Amara was more than an outburst. It was a symptom of something deeper. A culture that believed people like her were supposed to smile and take it. Not anymore. As the judge dismissed the court, Amara stood without urgency. She turned toward Bianca, not with vengeance, but with the power of someone who no longer had to whisper her worth. Bianca looked away first. Outside, the cameras flashed. Microphones lunged toward her. But Amara didn't speak. Not yet. She simply raised her head to the sky, breathed in the air like it was something new, and walked forward, through the crowd, past the headlines, and into a future she had carved herself. The court had delivered its ruling, but Amara had delivered something far greater, a reminder that silence can be broken, that dignity can be reclaimed, and that fire, once lit in the heart, can never be put out again. Amara Hayes stood in front of the mirror, not for vanity, but for clarity. The reflection that stared back wasn't just her face, it was the woman she had become. The woman the world tried to shrink into silence but couldn't. The woman who had once balanced plates and pleasantries in a luxury resort now stood upright, chin high, soul unshaken. The bruises left by Bianca Wexler's slap had long faded from her skin, but what remained was something far more lasting. Grace earned, not given. In the weeks following the verdict, Amara had been flooded with attention. Some wanted interviews. Others offered brand partnerships, book deals, and speaking tours. She turned most of them down. She wasn't interested in fame. She wasn't interested in becoming a symbol for others to consume. What she wanted was something quieter, but stronger. She wanted the power to shape her own story, on her own terms. She had returned to her hometown, the same Oakland streets that raised her, where the rhythm of jazz from corner cafes blended with the pulse of protest. This time, she wasn't coming home to disappear. She was coming home to begin again. Amara used a portion of her settlement to open a community center just blocks from the middle school she'd once attended. She called it the Mirror Room, not because it had mirrors, but because she wanted every young black girl who stepped inside to see herself as whole, unfiltered by other people's narratives, untouched by society's definitions of worth. It was a place for mentorship, healing, and storytelling. It was a place where the voices too often overlooked could finally echo loud enough to reach the next generation. She taught workshops on workplace rights, resilience, and how to document injustice in real time. But more than anything, she taught presence, the right to take up space, the audacity to believe your life, your truth, your breath mattered, even when no one else in the room seemed to think so. One afternoon, a young girl named Brielle approached her after a session. She couldn't have been older than 11. She clutched a drawing in her hands, Amara, standing tall, her hand outstretched like a superhero. "Miss Amara," Brielle whispered, "do you think it's okay to be angry when people treat you wrong?" Amara knelt down so their eyes were level. "Yes," she said gently. "It's okay to be angry. What matters is what you do with it. Don't let it eat you. Let it guide you. Let it remind you of what's worth protecting." Brielle nodded like she understood. And maybe she did. Because sometimes children know the truths adults spend years trying to forget. Elsewhere, the world moved on. The media eventually found new stories. The hashtags faded. Bianca Wexler relocated to Europe for personal reflection. She issued an apology from a PR firm's desk, a carefully written, vaguely worded letter that never mentioned Amara by name. It didn't matter. Amara didn't need her name on Bianca's lips. She had already written it in history. Some days were still hard. Healing, Amara learned, wasn't a straight road. It bent in strange places. It came with sleepless nights and flashbacks that hit her at red lights or in grocery store aisles. But it also came with laughter, with hugs from girls who saw her as more than a headline, with long walks where she no longer checked over her shoulder. It came, most powerfully, in moments like this one. Alone in the mirror, no courtroom, no camera, no audience, just her. She smoothed her curls back and smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she had survived everything that tried to tell her she couldn't. This was what real grace looked like. Not the kind that bows politely to injustice, but the kind that rises from it. Grace that isn't about forgiveness for others, but acceptance of self. Grace that isn't silent. It speaks through action. It moves through generations. As the sun began to set outside, casting gold along the edges of the mirror, Amara whispered to her reflection, "You did good." And for the first time, she believed it. She walked out of the room and into her future, not waiting for anyone to tell her she belonged, but knowing it with every step. And that was the final victory. Amara Hayes didn't just reclaim her voice. She made sure it would echo far beyond her own story. Amara Hayes never set out to be a symbol. She simply wanted to work hard, save for school, and build a future on her own terms. But one evening in a luxurious resort restaurant changed the course of her life. What started as a simple shift turned into a storm of public humiliation when a wealthy guest, Bianca Wexler, lashed out with words, contempt, and ultimately violence. All because Amara dared to exist in a space that someone like Bianca believed she didn't belong. But that night, Amara did something most people wouldn't expect. She stood up, with dignity, with strength, and with a single act of self-respect, she rewrote the narrative forced upon her. What followed wasn't just a court case or a viral video. It was a reckoning. The slap that Bianca threw became a spark, but it was Amara's response, her courage to fight back through truth and principle that lit a fire far greater. That fire exposed not only the bias in one moment, but the rot that often hides beneath the surface of privilege. And through that exposure came accountability. But what made Amara's journey so powerful wasn't the courtroom win or the public support. It was the quiet decision afterward to return to her community, to lift others with the strength she'd found in herself. She turned her pain into purpose and built something that would outlast headlines, a center for truth, empowerment, and growth. A place where young Black girls could see themselves not as targets, but as futures worth protecting. So what's the lesson here? It's this: injustice thrives in silence, but power grows when we refuse to be quiet. Amara's story reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's found in a calm refusal to be disrespected, in saying enough, in knowing your worth, even when the world tries to devalue it. Her story also shows us that grace is not weakness. True grace is standing firm in the storm and refusing to let hate define your character. It's choosing to rebuild, not just for yourself, but for those who come after you. And finally, it teaches us that the real measure of a person isn't what they endure, but what they choose to do with their experience. Amara chose to rise, to lead, to reflect something stronger than rage, resilience. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of the strength that lives inside all of us, then help us continue sharing voices like Amara's. Click subscribe now and join a community that believes in justice, empowerment, and storytelling that sparks change. Because we're just getting started, and with your support, the next story might be the one that changes everything.